Hi everyone. Today we are going to take a look at comprehension skills for the S.E.A examination. Now the comprehension aspect of your S.E.A examination comprises 50 marks of the language arts paper. You would have 20 marks allocated to the factual passage, 20 marks allocated to your poem, and 10 marks allocated to the graphic. Okay, so it is an important aspect of your examination, and one in which that you would like to score a high amount of marks so that it could be carried forward to your overall percentage for your examination. So the first aspect of doing your comprehension at a high quality is actually reading first. You do not go straight to your questions, but you actually start by reading. So reading, comprehension, factual passages, and poems are meant to be read more than once. The first time you read it should be detailed and slow, making sure as not to miss any important detail. So you must read not with the intention to just skim through, but basically to read in an effort to try to understand what is actually being said, what are the main ideas, and what is the main idea of the entire passage. Now, in reading as well, you should underline and highlight the main ideas which you may notice in each paragraph. So each paragraph would have a main idea. And in following with that concept, you would get questions, or you may get questions which actually ask what is the main idea of a particular paragraph. So in doing so, at the early stage, it would be easier for you to answer your questions. Also, you should underline any figurative devices, use of sensory details or imagery, etc., which you may have noticed, particularly in the poems. Now, figurative devices, we will deal with that later on in this tutorial. But once you understand what are figurative devices, you should, if you notice any, you should try to underline them, because again, they would or may ask questions on figurative devices, and it would be easier for you to find the answer and answer the question at a faster pace. So if you should notice any figurative devices, then you should, or imagery, sensory details, etc., then you should try to underline them. However, as stated here, these figurative devices are particularly noticed in the poems. Continuing with reading, reading should be done more than once. So when we talk about reading in detail, that would be your first reading. However, the second time can be at a faster pace, just to make sure that you fully understand the main ideas which the writer is conveying. So sometimes, no matter at what level of education you are at, you most times have to read something more than once to understand it entirely, and especially in a situation where you have to answer questions that follow. Now we're going to look at some common figurative devices. The first one that is very familiar to most students by standard 4 and 5 would be the simile. A simile is a comparison between two things using the word like or as. For example, as fast as a speeding bullet, or as light as a feather, or the whip stung like a bee. So in reading, if you notice anything like this or any similes, you should try to underline it, as well as if asked any questions to identify a simile, you should look for a comparison between two things using the word like or as. Another common figurative device would be the metaphor. A metaphor is a comparison between two unlike things without the use of like or as. For example, the snow is a white blanket, or he is a shining star, or the calm lake was a mirror. Now, how do we identify a metaphor? It is also a comparison, but it is a comparison between two unlike things without the use of like or as. Now, if you look at one of the examples, the snow is a white blanket, and you have to ask yourself, is the snow really a white blanket? No, it is two unlike things, but it is used, the white blanket is used as as a comparison to explain what the snow would look like, or to describe what the snow would look like. Okay, so that is called a metaphor. The third one, which is also common, would be a personification. A personification is describing something non-human by giving it human characteristics, feelings, or physical features or movements. For example, my car is a beauty, or the wind whispered through the dry grass, or the fire swallowed the entire forest. These are human-like qualities by things that are non-living. Like the fire swallowed, the fire is not human. However, they use the word swallowed. Okay, the wind is not human. However, they use the word whispered. Those are human-like qualities. They can also give feelings like crying, laughing, etc., or physical features like walking, talking, etc., the things that are not human as well. So you can look out for those type of characteristics in description, and it will be called personification. Onomatopoeia. An onomatopoeia is a word that imitates the natural sound of things. So the word sounds like the meaning of the word. It creates a sound effect that mimics or imitates the thing described. For example, the buzzing bee flew away, or the sack fell into the river with a splash. Onomatopoeias would be one word and not a phrase. So that is why we underline the word buzzing and splash. So we give a phrase for the example, but the actual onomatopoeia here would be buzzing and splash. So this is also another common figurative device used in comprehension. Another one is imagery. Now this is not always common, but we are trying to prepare for any eventuality, because there's always a question that sometimes we come back to and we say we were not sure what it meant. So we want to make sure that we cover everything. Imagery draws on the five senses, namely the details of touch, sight, smell, taste, and sound. However, and pay attention to this however, it is not to be confused with questions on senses, which is also on the five senses. Imagery is a more descriptive language, especially used in narratives or poems. So it will have a poetic way of actually expressing it. A poetic, sort of, as the word implies, a figurative device. Okay, so it wouldn't just mention sight, smell, touch, taste, etc., but it will have a poetic way about it, making it imagery instead of a question that is asking about your five senses, asking about to identify sight or to identify sound in a particular sentence or paragraph. So imagery would deal with the five senses, but it would be sounding more poetic or more like a figurative device. Now the five senses, as mentioned before, would be sound, touch, taste, sight, and smell. Five senses. These are used in both the factual passages and poems, and can be easily identified by considering which of the senses is being used to explain or describe. It may not have a poetic feel to it. It may be simple prose in terms of simple writing, but you would be able to identify if they are using sense of smell, sense of touch, etc. to answer your question. Additional question types. Mood. Sometimes they ask to identify the mood. Mood is the feeling you get while reading a passage, story, or poem. This could be happiness, sadness, darkness, anger, suspicion, loneliness, or even excitement. You should think about the setting and the language used by the author. So you would actually feel the mood. The mood is like a feeling that is conveyed in the way that the writer has written the passage or the poem. So remember, it is a feeling. Tone, however, which is another question that is not always common, but again, we prepare for any eventuality. Tone is the author's attitude. So it is not necessarily a feeling, but an attitude towards the subject of the passage or the poem. For example, positive, formal, informal, serious, comic, sarcastic, etc. So this does not sound like feelings, but this sounds like a attitude. Students are sometimes confused between mood and tone. That is why we are trying to clarify the difference between both of them. However, mood is a feeling and tone is an attitude or general point of view in the type of words or phrases used in the writing. Additional question types. Contrast. This would mean differences in points of views or paragraphs, stanzas, etc. So one paragraph may have a different point of view than another. This is sometimes more common as well in poems. So one stanza might have a happy mood and another stanza might have a sad mood, etc., or a different point of view. Comparison. This would mean the similarities in point of views or paragraphs, stanzas, etc. So you look for comparisons. Word meaning. So this is another type of question. So basically, most of the things we are covering types of questions that can be asked. So word meaning. This is sometimes confused to mean a synonym. A lot of students write when the question asks what is the meaning of the word in the passage. Usually they use that term as written in the passage. They didn't actually ask for the meaning of the word in generally, which is a synonym, right? So sometimes students confuse it to mean that they should write a synonym. However, in some cases, it may be. But to make sure the correct answer is derived, students should check for context clues. Using context clues is always the best way to answer these type of questions instead of just jumping to the assumption that a synonym is the answer. So how do we do context clues? Context clues is basically that you go back into the passage and you read the sentence or the paragraph in which the word is in and try to derive an answer that if you take out that word and you replace the word that you think is the word meaning, the sentence should feel the same, it should read the same, it should mean the same. Okay, so again, context clues works like that. If you remove the word and you put your word in there that you assume to be the meaning, the sentence should read and mean the same. So that is word meaning, okay, using context clues. Most questions are asked in a way requiring a basic yes or no answer, but then requires supporting details. Most times from the passage. If it is from the passage, the supporting details should be written using quotation marks, as it would be quoted from the passage. So a lot of students for the past 2 years have fallen away from using quotation marks, which is a bad habit compared to the years before, right? So a lot of times they ask a question and you have to answer yes or no, but then they ask for supporting details. So they ask to support your answer with details from the passage. support your answer with details from the passage. So that means they are looking for a quote from the passage to support your yes or no. When you are doing so, you should use quotation marks for the words that are taken out from the passage. However, not all supporting details may be from the passage, but an interpretation of the details from the passage. Be careful to read the question carefully and always include your supporting details, since this will be the only way to get the full marks. Because basically the yes or the no is just 1 mark. The supporting details can carry as much as 2 additional marks. If you keep scoring 1 mark for just saying yes or not having the correct supporting details, this could create a big problem for your mark at the end of the paper. Write answers in full sentences. This is another problem that students have been having for the last 2 years because of the structure of a lot of the test papers, right, which allows them to write 2 and 3 words, 1 word sometimes. Write answers in full sentences. This is a common practice by using a combination of part of the question and adding the answer to it, creating a complete sentence. I'm going to repeat that. A combination of part of the question and adding the answer to it, creating a complete sentence. So writing in full sentences is very important. As I always tell students, how can you score 3 marks by writing 3 words or 4 words, and somebody else from another school or in your own class takes the time to fill up the lines with a full sentence, using both part of the answer and the answer, adding the answer, part of the question, and adding the answer from the passage? It wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be fair for the examiner to give you the full marks, and 2, it wouldn't be the proper way, so therefore you cannot get the full marks. Pay attention to marks which will be awarded, as it indicates to you how much work you need to put into writing. Do not take for granted the amount of space given to you to write your answer. A lot of students, I think they assume that all the lines that are given to them, I do not know exactly what they think, but I believe that the examiners have given a lot of thought into the examination itself and are giving you enough space to write full sentences and to write according to the amount of marks that are being awarded for each question. Use keywords from the question to find answers from the passage. It is sometimes like word search. There is a link between the question and the passage. So sometimes there are words in the question that can link back to answers from the passage. So that is one way that you can find answers as well. You should not try to guess an answer based on your knowledge of the topic presented by the author. Comprehension requires you to develop your skills in analyzing what someone else is writing about. Basically, you are learning something, an educational skill, to try to understand what somebody else has written about. So do not try to rely on your knowledge. So if they're writing about the moon, or if they're writing about the ocean, or manatees, or papaboa, or whatever, do not rely on your own information, on your own thoughts to answer any question. You must go back to the passage to get your answers. And lastly, do not leave any blank spaces. The examiner cannot feel sorry for you and give you a mark for a blank space. Not that they will feel sorry for you and give you marks, but basically, if you make an attempt, you might be surprised that you might get a mark or 2 in between instead of leaving blank spaces. So make every effort to answer every question. No matter what mark you are making right now, try your best to answer every question and it will make a difference. Okay, so I hope that this tutorial was helpful to you. And remember, you can always go back, you can replace it in parts. You can stop at certain parts so that probably it will help you in some way. If you have a question, almost any question that they can give you, there's something in here that can help you. So if they ask you about figurative devices, you can go back to the video, you can stop on similes, you can stop on personification, etc., and it might be able to give you the answer until you get better at it. So please use the tutorial, and I hope that you are able to score that 50 marks that you deserve.